Hey, my name is Zach Reed. I'm going to tell you guys about my family heritage paper. So, when I think of family heritage, I think of my family on my mother's side and the church that my family started, and that's pretty much what anyone in my family would say when they think about our family's heritage. Now, as for our ancestry or our ethnicity, my family has never really had much of an interest in that, which is probably why I've never had much of an interest in that. I've never really been interested in where I came from or who I came from or how we got here, or what my ancestors had to go through to get here. And I know that that may sound a bit cruel, maybe, and like I don't care about my family, and that's not the case. It's something that's never been important in my family. I've actually never heard of any of them in my extended family speak of ancestry or ethnicity. It's just a given that no one really has ever taken the time to even care about that. However, we did do an ancestry DNA test a few years back. I completed that because my mother asked me to. And the reason that we done that is not so much about our ethnicity, as much as my grandfather on my father's side was he was an orphan. So we've been unable to find any documentation of adoption or where he might have came from. We don't know who his parents are or anything like that. So we just done this ancestry thing to kind of try to figure out if we could find anyone that linked my father's father to anyone at all. So the results came back for me that I'm 36% Scottish, 28% English and Northwestern European, 17% German, and 9% Irish, and then the last 10 is Wales, Sweden, or Norway descent. Again, when I saw that, I did think that was interesting, but it didn't pique my interest enough to wonder how I got here or where I came from. And I think you'll get a better understanding of why I feel this way once I get farther along with this presentation and into this paper. So there was one interesting thing we found out with the ancestry. We found out, it's been several years now, that my father has a half sister here in Kentucky who's much older than him. My father's 50 years old, and his sister is in her 70s, and they share the same father. And that was very interesting to us, and my dad actually met them, and they've become a kind of a second little family. There's only a handful of them, but other than that, that's where the trail stopped. We were unable to find anything on my dad's father beyond him, other than this other child that he had. No ancestry DNA or anything about anyone else that could have been our relatives. So I think you'll gain a better understanding now when I explain my maternal side of things. So my father basically seamlessly integrated into my mother's family, and I talk about my maternal grandparents, and though they didn't care much about ethnicity or heritage, they do care about tradition, and they did start a heritage. And this is what would probably come to define my family heritage, and that is the church that they started. It's called Redemption Road Church, and my grandparents on my mother's side started that church with their my mother's sister and her husband. So my uncle is the pastor of that church still to this day. That's the church I was raised in. It's a pretty strict Pentecostal, super conservative, far right believing church, and the atmosphere is as you would expect in that type of environment. However, that is my family's beliefs, and that to them is the most important thing. And if you ask anyone in my family, extended family on my mother's side, to tell you about our heritage, they'll not mention ethnicity, they will not mention ancestry, they will mention the heritage of the church. That is what they will mention, because to them that is the most important thing in their lives. And I think that it's really hard for many people to grasp the concept of how insulated my family is, without just fully going into detail and explaining everything. But that church defines my family. And when speaking of heritage, that is what gets brought up. So I was taught pretty conservative, strict doctrine growing up, and it took me a while to start to form my own beliefs and kind of find my own way. I had a lot of issues with the church. I've always kind of stuck out in the crowd and been different. It's just, they call me a black sheep, because I'm just different than the rest of my family. But traditions are something that I've come to appreciate with my family. Christmas dinner at my mom's every year on Christmas Eve, that's a family tradition that I've come to appreciate and love. Because it wasn't until I met my wife now, Shelby, that I realized not everyone has those traditions. Her family doesn't really have any traditions. So the Christmas, the birthday dinners that my family has every couple of months was all new to my wife. So it kind of gave me an appreciation for those traditions, because I realized that to her that was something that she's never experienced, and it's kind of made me grateful for that. So I have ended up having some issues with my heritage and my family, because I am no longer a member of that church. And the reason I bring this up is not to shed negative light on the church or the doctrine. Actually, over the years, my mother and father have really become more open-minded and accepting of me and the way that I am. I'm a recovering heroin addict. I've been clean for almost 4 years now, and they really opened their mind through that experience when I was in active addiction and then on to recovery, and it kind of showed them another side of the world that they had kind of been blind to for a while. So I don't mention the issues that I had with my church to shed negative light on them, but I think it's very important to mention, because as I've said before, you can't speak of heritage in my family without talking about the church, because they simply don't care about their ethnicity or where they came from. So that being said, it's interesting, because through me leaving the church, if I think of my heritage now that I'm not a member of that church, it's almost as if I don't have any. I think about that church and how it's engulfed my family's lives, and it's just, their lives revolve around that church and the things that go along with owning and operating a church like that. And now that I've left that church, I feel like I don't have a heritage, because since we didn't care about ethnicity or where we came from, the church is what has brought that family together, and that's what they intend on passing down to their children for generations, is the doctrine of that church, the beliefs, the heritage that all started when my grandparents and my uncle started that church. So now that I have taking myself out of that, in a sense, I have signed away my heritage as well, because they do not take well. My extended family, my parents have been able to separate their church and the church beliefs from their relationship with me, because they know that it's best to just agree to disagree, and that we love each other and we continue to be a family no matter what. As for my extended family, me leaving the church has been a very strenuous situation, to say the least. They do not take well to it. They have not treated me the same since. They see it as me throwing away my heritage and stomping on it, as they would say. And that's interesting, because when doing this paper, I've made it clear that I'm not really extremely interested in my heritage and ethnicity and all of those things, but it's an interesting feeling when you've been exposed to this heritage for your entire life, and now that you are no longer a part of that church, that heritage has kind of been taken away and you've been removed from that in your life. So while that's not necessarily a bad thing in my opinion, but I can definitely see that there's a void there. There's a space in my life where that used to be, and now it's gone. But I'm learning to fill that with other things. My love for music. I started playing guitar when I was about 10 years old, and I actually played in that church for years and traveled to different states playing at different churches and things like that. But so that's pretty much the sum of my family heritage and how I feel towards that. So thank you for listening, and I really appreciate it.